Let me just tell you a little bit about me. I am a solopreneur. I'm currently president of my own company, Geffen Careers. I'm a certified coach with Get5. I also do career coaching for positions for the White Hawk Group. I do webinars not only for savvy ladies, but also for the New York Public Library, Brooklyn College, TC Next, and Floral Park Library. Formerly, I was Director of Professional Development for the Council for Economic Education. Prior to that, I was interim CEO for the Financial Women's Association. Prior to that, CEO of the New York Society of Security Analysts, which is now CFA New York. And I worked at a number of different colleges for the city of New York, as well as private colleges. And I started out as a teacher. So I've changed jobs 14 times in my lifetime. Only one job I was laid off. I'll tell you about that a little later and how to deal with that. And I have changed career time. So I'm in my third career. So what are we going to talk about today? In the job search process, there are 5 steps. And the interview process is really step 4. So first you go through assessment. What are your skills, your interests, your values? What's your job target? Then you go through branding, writing your pitch, your cover letter, your resume, your LinkedIn profile. Then you start connecting, building your network, talking to people, getting interviews. And then when you get the interviews, that's the time that you have to differentiate yourself from the competition. That's what we're going to be talking about today. How do you present yourself and your accomplishments during the interview to distinguish yourself from the competition? And then after the interview, it's the enhancing. What do you do to follow up? And we will talk about how to write your follow-up email. So, introduction to the process. There are 4 parts to this process. First is your strategy. Thinking like a consultant, as though you were actually working for the company, even though you aren't, to help them solve their problems. The second is preparation. How do you prepare for answering the key questions? And we'll talk about specific questions, the typical questions, the difficult questions, behavioral questions. Anticipate what you're going to be asked. And then the follow-up afterwards, the influencing letter or impact letter that will get you asked back for the second and third interviews. So strategy and preparation. Some don'ts. Don't take the tactical fear-based approach. So don't memorize answers to every possible question. We'll talk about how you can prepare answers. Don't ask 3 specific questions at the end to show how smart you are. You want to pepper your interview with questions all along to elicit information about the company and its problems and challenges. Don't waste a lot of time talking about things other than the employer's problems. And don't write a thank you note. It's not simply a thank you note. It's an influencing letter or an impact letter or email. And we will get into the details. So instead, your strategy should be to think like a consultant. Research the company to see how you might help. Where can you get the information? You go to the company website, read about their history, their mission, their vision. Look at their recent annual report, which will tell you about the finances and their key accomplishments for the past year. Research the person who's going to be interviewing you by looking him or her up on LinkedIn. Ask questions during the process to explore how you can help. Where are their problems? What are they working on now? What's coming up in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year? And you want to share examples of your past successes by giving stories that illustrate how you can get things done. And then you want to follow up with a proposal, as all consultants do. They have a conversation, they find out what the problems are, and then they come up with possible solutions. So pretend you're the consultant. Pretend you're on the same side of the table. Pretend you already have the job and you're just there to help them solve their problems. So the interview doesn't become a simple question and answer. The interview becomes a conversation where you speak, then you ask a question, then they speak. And with each question you ask, you get deeper into what are their issues, what are their challenges, what are their problems. And then you need to think about an illustration from your past experience that shows you can help them solve that problem. So it really doesn't matter what questions they ask you. This is in the back of the mind of the person who's interviewing you. How can you help me? And why do you want to work here? And will you fit in with the culture of the organization? So they can ask you dozens of different kinds of questions, and I've got lists and lists of questions, but ultimately these are the three things the interviewer wants to learn. How can you as a candidate help me and the company solve its problems? Why do you want to work here? And you got to have a good reason. Otherwise, they think, well, you're just applying to every little job and you really don't care about this company. That's why you need to do your research and find out all about the company. Maybe the values are in sync with your values. And will you fit in with the rest of the group? So, the night before and just before you walk into the interview, you want to practice and think about how are you going to handle an issue you're afraid they might bring up, such as, oh, why were you out of work for a while? Or were you ever let go for a while? Why do you want to work here? What are some questions you want to ask? Come up with 2 to 3 or maybe 4 accomplishment stories, and we're going to go into those stories. Those are the things you're going to use to answer the questions. And your pitch. Everyone needs to have a pitch. A pitch is anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, a brief introduction of who you are, how many years experience you have, what your best skills are, and a teaser about one of your accomplishments. And based upon how you think you can help them, what are you going to talk about? So, questions you want to ask them. Get information about the person or persons you're going to be meeting with. Sometimes an interview is just one person. Sometimes it could be 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people. I've had interviews with 6 to 8 people around a table. That's not uncommon if you interview at a college or university or with the board of a not-for-profit. Form a hypothesis about each of these people's issues. The people who interview you, are they in marketing? Are they in finance? Are they in IT? What are they thinking about? What are their challenges? And then you can ask questions during the interview process to prove or disprove your hypothesis about what their needs are. So when you ask a question, don't assume something. So here's 2 ways to ask the same question. The first way is not the best way. Oh, your e-commerce platform has some issues that are contributing to sales decline, including not implementing X, whatever that is. And you say, well, I can help you fix this. A better way to say this is, I noticed that you're not doing X on your e-commerce site, but your competitor does. I led an implementation of the X application in my company, which helped us to substantially increase our sales. Have you thought about trying this yourself? So you have to be careful about putting a negative spin and giving negative criticism. You want to be constructive in what you say to the interviewer. So how are you going to research? Topical news, Wall Street Journal, trade journals. You can find all about the company and the industry. LinkedIn profiles. Most companies have a LinkedIn profile page for their company that's separate and apart from their own company website. You can just do a Google search and see what pops up. Local news, trade news, articles, online publications, blogs. Go to the organization's website, as I mentioned. There's a section for investors. There will be an annual report. And there will be brief bios of the key people in the executive suite, the president, the managing directors, the chief marketing officer, the chief information officer, the chief financial officer. And then you can go to other websites that may provide information about the company. For example, glassdoor.com. You want to be very prepared for this interview. You want to show them that you've already learned something about their company. Now, what kinds of questions can you ask during the interview process? It's not just one way. They're going to ask you questions and you're going to ask that person or person's questions. So you're going to ask anything that will help you to understand what are their issues or how are you going to follow up and make the sale. So you can ask such things as, what would you need my help with right away? What are your greatest challenges in the next 6 months or in the next year or in the next 3 to 5 years? Who will I be interacting with and how? You really want to find out who's going to be on your team. Are you working solo? Are you working across departments? Who else will you be interacting with? How will my success be measured? A very important question, because for new people, it's common to be evaluated at 3 months and 6 months. They're not going to wait a year. Once you're there at the company, yes, you will have a yearly evaluation. So you want to know, well, what measures are they going to use? What does a typical day look like? You want to get a sense of what % of your time you're going to be spending on each of these activities. And what are the characteristics of the people who succeed in this role? You want to get a sense of the qualities, the personal characteristics, as well as the skills of someone who's going to be successful. Share at least one success story. Now, we talked about success stories, and I'm going to go into how you create your story. You need to come up with 2 or 3 or maybe 4 that are relevant for this job. You can introduce one of these success stories in your pitch at a very high level. Don't give any details. Practice at home or with a friend or with a coach telling these stories. Try to use one story or another as part of your answer to every question you get. So the story, here's the key. I use P.A.R, which stands for problem, action, result. Some people use SOAR, subject, objective, action, result. Some people use STAR. They're different, but they all mean the same thing. What are the circumstances around which you had this problem? What was the problem? What was the situation? A stands for action. What action did you take? Maybe you created a team. Maybe you developed a new software package. Maybe you found a new partner. You may be doing several different things under the actions. And what was the result? Did you increase revenue? Did you decrease expenses? Did you expand the number of clients? Did you open up a new office? Try to quantify your results whenever you can, using dollars, percents, numbers. Make it dramatic, make it engaging, make it important. You want to give the interviewer the sense that you are successful, you are innovative, without even using the word successful or innovative. By telling your story and showing results, the person listening to you will understand those words. They will pop up in that person's head without your saying those words. You need to prepare your 2-minute pitch. You can use this to answer any open-ended question, such as, tell me about yourself. Often an interviewer will start the interview with, so tell me about yourself. They don't want your autobiography. They don't want you to go on for 5 to 10 minutes. It should be 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Or tell me about your background or what brings you here. So you can say, I am an educator with 10 plus years of experience designing online courses for engineers internationally. I designed 100 courses and put them on Blackboard over a 4-year period. I'm here today because I want to help you solve your problems for training and development. So it's very short. That was less than 2 minutes. It was probably a minute. Think about your pitch, write down your pitch, practice your pitch so that it sounds conversational. Meeting, interview, and format. Okay, so what can you expect at this interview? Often your first interview might be on the phone, and many of them are still by Zoom. So, night before the interview, you want to get yourself prepared. Even if you're going to do it on Zoom, lay out the clothes you want to wear so you don't have to think about that in the morning. Shine your shoes, get a good night's sleep. Prepare an index card with 3 things about yourself that you must say. You don't want to forget those 3 things. And 3 questions that you might want to ask. It's okay to take notes during the interview. It's okay to come in with that index card. And certainly, if you're interviewing online, you can have the notes right in front of you and no one has to see them. Dressing for the interview. Now, this goes for, oh, sorry, there's a typo there, interview. Dress as you would for an in-person interview. Don't wear white online. It's too bright. Don't wear black. It washes you out. For online, don't wear pinstripes and herringbones. They're too busy. So you can wear light blue, navy or dark blue, solid neutrals, pale colors like pale pink, pale blush. Men should have a suit and tie or a jacket and tie, unless you know that everyone in that company dresses casually and that it's okay to be casual for the interview. Women, a dress with a scarf or a necklace, a lovely blouse and a jacket, or a dress with a jacket. Morning of the interview. Now, again, I recommend this whether you're going to a live interview or it's online, and I'll tell you why, because it really makes you feel you're getting ready for the real thing. Take your shower, your bath. Don't use aftershave or cologne that's too strong, because that does not make a good impression. Brush your teeth, use your mouthwash, and before you go into the interview, whether it's live or it's online, take a few deep breaths. Just calm down. If you do yoga, you can do a little meditation before you go into the interview. You want to lower your heart rate, okay? You don't want to go in all excited and nervous at the interview. Okay, so get there early. And when we mean early, it's not 30 minutes, it's 10 minutes, that's good enough. Do take notes, have some paper and pen available. Show enthusiasm, show energy. Look the person in the eye. Now, when you're online, the best way to look the person in the eye is to look straight at your camera. On a Zoom call, that person may be in a box that's above you, below you, to your right or to your left. You still want to look straight at the camera because then the person will feel you're looking at him or her. If you're in person, firm handshake. Don't keep pumping up and down, up and down, up and down. One shake, that's it. Look the person in the eye when you shake hands. Don't announce yourself more than 5 minutes ahead of time. Don't fidget, particularly online. This goes for live as well as online, because when you're online, you're close up and every gesture is magnified. So please don't play with your hair or scratch your nose or rest your hand on your chin. It's very annoying. And don't be negative. Negative is a no-no. So when you need to answer questions, this is how you're going to program your brain. Pause and think, can I use this question to show how I can help them by using one of my stories of accomplishments? Now, if you can't, then you say, can I sidestep the question, get them off the subject? If you can't, then be brief with your answer and steer it back to them with a question. I just want to get this out of the way here. This is in the way. So when you finish answering the question, Then steer it back to them and say, oh, so please tell me more about that problem you were discussing in the marketing department. Or can you tell me more about this new location that you are opening up? Try to steer it back to them to move the conversation along. How to answer questions. Okay, here we go. What are some typical questions that you pretty much can get from anybody on any job interview? Why should we hire you? Why do you want to work for us as opposed to our competitor? Maybe you feel this company has a better customer service record, and so you really are into customer service, so you want to work for company X instead of company Z. What's your biggest weakness? What was your biggest mistake? Have you had a disagreement with your boss? No one expects you to be perfect. They know that you have made mistakes. They know you have weaknesses. The purpose of this question is to find out, how did you handle making your mistake? What did you learn from it? And how did you change your behavior afterwards so you would not make the same mistake again? The question about a disagreement with your boss. They want to know that, first of all, you will stand up for yourself. If you have an idea or a proposal, you do want to share it with your boss. Your boss may disagree with you. And then you go ahead and you say, okay, I had this proposal, I made a proposal, my boss disagreed. So then we compromised and we went ahead with his proposal. What they want to know are two things. Can you stand up for yourself and your ideas? And are you willing to be flexible and to compromise? So let's say you get a question and then you think about it. Here's the question. So what is your greatest strength? Let's say your strength is in planning or organizing or creating websites or evaluating and analyzing sales data. Your thinking should be this: what story do I want to tell them? And what's my greatest strength in that story? So then your answer becomes obvious. My greatest strength is, fill in the blank. Why don't I share with you an example from my past experience so you can see how this strength could help you in the workplace or could help your company in the workplace? Then you tell them one of your success stories. P.A.R, problem, action, result. And then after you tell them the story, consider ending with another question to advance the dialogue, to advance the conversation. Now, I'm not going to read all these questions. You're going to get a copy of this. Most popular interview questions, according to Get5. Get5 is a big outplacement company. Why are you interested in the position? What do you know about our company? If you fumfer and you say, gee, I don't know, you had better do your research and have a couple of things to say about this company. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Don't answer that one with, I wouldn't want to get your job in 5 years, because they're hiring you. They want you to be at the company for a few years doing this job because they're spending a lot of time and money to hire you. Tell me about yourself. That's the one you answer with your pitch. Short and sweet. Describe yourself in 3 words. Pick 3 of your best characteristics. I'm flexible. I'm a collaborator. I'm a planner. We talked about when you make a mistake, they want to know what you learned from mistakes. Now, behavioral questions. When a question starts with the words, tell me about a time when, that's a behavioral question. They want to find out how you act with other people, how you relate to your supervisor, to your direct reports, to other members of your team, to your colleagues. Some of these questions might include, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss, or you had to convince a team of a direction they didn't want to go in, or tell me about a time when you failed, or tell me about a time when your work was criticized. So be prepared to have an answer. Now, references. Often, companies will ask for your references even before they have offered you the job. This can be a sticky situation because if you only have 3 or 4 people you can go to, you don't want them to be bothered every time you go on an interview and they get a call from someone to give a reference, even if you haven't been offered the job. So don't give out your references until you're pretty close to an offer. That means you've had several interviews, you're in the finals, and then they ask you. And you can say to the person interviewing you, I want to protect my references. I want to contact them beforehand as a courtesy. Then you contact your references, you tell them about the job, you tell them what you'd like them to say about you. Then you go back to the company with the names and contact info, email, phone number for your references. This is very important. It protects you, it protects your references, and it allows you to fill in your references on the job before they get that phone call. So you want to tie your answers into what job success means. Often this means they're looking for answers that show leadership qualities, response to pressure, strategic abilities, how you think, how committed are you to this company? How do you behave in certain situations? Those were those behavioral questions. Self-awareness. Do you know about yourself? Do you know what you don't know? Do you know what your weaknesses are? Now, interview follow-up. It begins at the end of the interview. Before you even close the interview, there are a few questions you need to ask. Are you interviewing other candidates? How do I measure up? Now, they may say, well, we can't talk to you about the other candidates, but you can say, well, you don't have to give me their names, but is there something that they have? Is there some skill set or quality they have that I don't have? See if they'll answer that. Or you can ask, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? You want to get a sense at the end of the interview that they're interested in you or they're not, and why they may not be, or is there something missing that you don't have that some other candidate has? Just like in sales, the sale begins after the customer tells you what their objections are. So how are you going to follow up? Let's say you find out you're missing something. Now, we'll get to that in a minute. If the interview gets off topic, you need to get it back on topic. Okay, how was your tennis game? Oh, we went to the same school. If they're talking too much, this may happen occasionally. The interviewer talks too much, you have to find a way to politely interrupt and ask them a question and say how you can help them. Now, difficult interview questions. Use the strategic approach. Think how you're going to play this. Think which story you're going to use. Have a positive answer for everything. You want this to work. They want it to work. And if the answer is uncomfortable, keep it brief and then change the subject. So here's a whole long list of difficult questions. We've gone over a few of these already. Don't memorize your answers. Think of the story, your accomplishment. Tell the story, problem, action, result. Be enthusiastic. Leave them on a high note. Now, just one other point for Skype interviews. Body language and positioning. How you interact online is equally as important as how you would interact in a live interview. Don't sit in a chair that has wheels or that swivels. You need a straight back chair that stays in one place. Focus on open postures, broad shoulders. Lean against the back of your chair. You want to be open. Don't hunch over like this. Eye contact. As I mentioned, look into the camera. Then the interviewer will think you are looking at him or her. Smile. Try to be relaxed. Even if you're not, act relaxed. Pause after a question is asked by the interviewer to make sure you don't speak on top of them. Now, the salary question. This is another question that's often asked early on, and it's important that you avoid the question because it destroys your negotiating leverage. If you can't talk about salary until you're clear about what the job is. And salary is only one piece of compensation. So you might exclude yourself if you come up with a number that's too high, or you come up with a number that's too low. If it's too low, they'll think, well, this person doesn't have enough experience. If it's too high, that'll throw you out because they don't want to go that high. So if you're asked about salary, this is what you say. The first time you're asked, you say, I know we'll both be fair and we'll work something out. Leave it at that. Second time you're asked, say, well, there are so many aspects to compensation: base salary, bonus, matching, raise, medical, vacation. If you don't mind, I'd like to postpone this discussion until I understand thoroughly the aspects of the job and compensation. Third time they ask you, you can say, well, what are you thinking about? I'm sure we'll be able to work something out. And then if they keep pushing, whether it's the recruiter or it's the interviewer, and they keep pushing, they say, well, we need to know what your salary is. So then you say, I've done my research, and the typical range for this position in this location is, and you give a range, a low to a high. I'm looking for a salary of a low to a high. Now, your low that you give them has to be a number that you are willing to accept. Because if you say I'm looking for 75 to 100, you better be willing to accept the 75. You say I'm looking for 100 to 150, you better be willing to accept the 100. Now, in all likelihood, your low is still a little higher than their low, and your high may be higher than their high. So there's somewhere in between where you're going to be settling on this. Now, let's say they ask you, what are you making now? Bad question. You can use the same strategy as we talked about before, saying, well, until I know what the job is, I really don't want to talk about this, or let's table this. But if they insist, because they cannot get this answer from calling up your HR department, you can say, I really don't see how that's relevant because I want to be paid what's fair, what I'm worth in the market. Or my previous job was very different than this job, so the salary is not relevant. Now, if they keep insisting on trying to figure out what your present salary is or your most recent salary is, that may be a bad sign for the company culture. Then you may want to think about whether you really want to work for them or not. So here's the big thing: follow up after the interview. After each interview, you need to write an influencing or impact letter or email. We don't send letters anymore by mail with the stamp. We do send emails. You need to send an email to each person who interviewed you. Do not send a mass email. If you've been interviewed by 2 or 3 or 5 or people, each person must get his or her own email. Include anything you forgot to bring up. Often after an interview, we say, oh, darn it, I should have talked about X. So bring up X in the follow-up. Maybe you answered a question not as well as you would have liked to. You can bring that up again and give a better answer in the email. If they've raised any objections to your candidacy, say, well, we don't see that you've done a lot of analysis of sales data. And you can relate to that and say, yes, you've done that. Or you can say, I'm willing to do a proposal. And in the follow-up, you must also show you have learned something about their company and their issues and how you can solve their problems. It's okay in your follow-up. In fact, it's really encouraging in your follow-up to repeat some of the skills you mentioned during the interview, to repeat 1 or 2 of the stories you mentioned during the interview to show how you can solve their problems. Don't forget, the interview is talking to lots of people. And unless you repeat yourself, they're not going to remember who you are. Now, let's say you know you can do the job, but they're not quite convinced. So you may need to write a proposal as a follow-up. Example, there was a young woman going for a job to write a newsletter for a law firm, and she had done lots of newsletters, but not for a law firm. So she wrote a newsletter about law. She did some research and she wrote a newsletter and she sent it into them, and then she got the job. There was someone who they said, well, you don't have enough sales analysis. So she followed up with an email and said, please send me some raw data and I will analyze it. And the company did send her the raw data and she analyzed it, wrote a report, sent it back, and made an appointment to talk about it. So what you want to do is write a proposal as though you were a consultant, stating the problem, stating the relevance, your solution, and a timeline. It could be a newsletter. It could be analyzing the sales data. It could be simply creating a PowerPoint presentation to show them that you're capable of doing it. And in that email, you need to say you're going to call to present your proposal, and then you need to call. So let's review what we learned today. Treat the interview as though it were a consulting meeting, as though you were on the same side of the table as the people interviewing you. You're both there to figure out how to solve their problems. Do your research in advance on the company and on the person who's interviewing you. Remember to ask questions throughout the interview, not just at the end, throughout the process, to ferret out their issues, their challenges, their problems, and what are their goals for the next 3 to 6 months? What are their goals for the next 1 to 3 years? Remember to talk about your accomplishments and how to solve their problems. Use the P.A.R. rubric: problem, action, result. Remember, the interview is all about the company, not about you. And finally, follow up with each person who's interviewed you. Each person deserves his or her own email. Now, I want to repeat before we get to the questions that there is a free service online from Savvy Ladies called the Helpline. So if you have any questions about finances, please go to the website and look for Helpline, and you will be able to get some answers. So now we're open for questions, please. You're muted. You're muted.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have some questions, Amy, that came up through your presentation. It was a fantastic presentation. And of course, many of them were around the application sometimes is online that you need to submit before you even get to the one-to-one interview. What happens with the online application when you need to put in salary information?
Good question. Okay. This is how you get around it. You can put in the number 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. Any number that will game the system and allow you to complete the application, but do not put in a real number, because once you put in a real number, then you cannot negotiate.
Excellent. Thank you for that, because I know that is usually a stumbling block. Also, many times they also ask for references in the online application. What do you suggest with that one?
See if you can write in, we'll provide them later. I don't know if you can write in some kind of text that will game the system. It won't be the name of someone, but it's a text that they game the system. And if they ask for a phone number, you put in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. I haven't done that. I'm going to have to try to do that and see if that works. But yeah, I know they try to get your references. It's not a good thing, especially if you're applying a lot online.
A question here on the follow-up email following the interview. How long, what's the ideal length of a follow-up email?
4 short paragraphs. The first paragraph: thank you very much for interviewing me for the position of such and such. I'm extremely interested. Second paragraph: I learned blank about your company. Third paragraph: as I mentioned, my best skills are X, Y, and Z. And here's an example of how I can help you solve your problem. And last paragraph: I'm certain I can make a valuable contribution to the name of the company, and I look forward to the next step in the process. It's really quite short, 4 short paragraphs. People don't read a lot anymore, so you don't want to give them a lot to read.
And I'm going to jump in and say, Amy, having just started myself in the new executive director role here at Savvy Ladies, I did go through an interviewing process. And one of the best tips I can give everyone out there is Grammarly. I have to say that when you're writing emails, it's really important to get your spelling correct. And I found by adding Grammarly, which is an app you can add to your online or your phone, really does actually make a big difference.
Absolutely. If you have any typographical errors or grammatical errors, either in your cover letter or your email or your resume, you may be knocked out, because if you don't pay attention to the details, you may be knocked out. You may never get to the interview.
No, I think that's very true. There was a question here about what if your first interview is a phone interview? Many of those tips I think you referenced would definitely make sense. Sit up straight, feel comfortable, breathe. But as a phone interview, is there any certain tips that you or best practices for a phone interview screening?
That's a great question. I would still say dress properly and sit up straight, because they can tell you don't want to slouch. You need to show enthusiasm through your voice and confidence through your voice. You need to modulate your voice. Sometimes talk a little louder, sometimes talk a little softer. Show enthusiasm, which means you need to practice with someone, a friend, a buddy, a coach, so that you come across as knowledgeable, confident, and enthusiastic.
That's great. There's one last question here as well. What if the hiring manager asks for copies of your work? How do you go about sharing some work? Maybe you don't have that work. You're getting back into the workforce and something is not as current, but also it might be proprietary and you're not able to.
Okay, that's an excellent question. If something's proprietary, you just say, this is proprietary and my company will not let me share it. If it's something you did a long time ago, so what? Don't put a date on it and just share it. Again, put it through the spell check and the editor check before you send it to them. So that depends, but you don't have to put a date on it. They want to see an example of your writing, for example. It doesn't have to be from last month or last year. It could be from 5 or 10 years ago. They don't have to know that.
This is a question that just popped in to ask Amy, to ask you, how do you prepare or account for bias in any of the preparation or interviewing? If you begin to sense that, or someone seems pushy, how do you manage unconscious bias sometimes?
Well, I don't know that you can manage someone's bias. If they're biased, they're biased. And why would you want to work for a company or a person who's got bias? That's something to think about. I mean, there's no way to know that. I mean, if you get a vibe, you get some kind of feeling or sense that you're uncomfortable with this person, then you need to think about, is it worth it for me to pursue this job and to work for this company? One of my clients was a few years back, was a modern Orthodox Jewish man, and he wore a kippah, and he said to me, well, should I wear the kippah? Should I take it off during the interview? I said, well, if you want them to accept you, you should wear the kippah. Why lie about who you are? Because if they're not going to accept you, then why do you want to work for them? Same thing goes for any ethnic group, any other diverse group.
That's very true. Very true. This is a question, should a proposal be sent after the company has rejected you? What do you do after a rejection? Do you want to stay on their radar or future opportunities? What do you do?
You can stay in touch with someone once a month, send them an email with, oh, I read this article that you might be interested in, sharing some information. It's okay to stay in touch with people, because sometimes you're just not the right fit at that time, but maybe 6 months or a year from now you are. It doesn't hurt to stay in touch with people. I worked for the same person in 2 different places, 10 years apart. So she hired me once at the College of Insurance, and then she had other jobs. I had other jobs. 10 years later, she hired me again at the Risk and Insurance Management Society. So it doesn't hurt to stay in touch with people, but just don't, you don't want to be a
pest.
A pest, yeah, annoying. Don't be annoying.
Don't be annoying. Exactly. Well, Amy, this has been terrific. I believe you had a slide. This slide here is how to get in touch with you, because you do offer one-on-one coaching. Should anyone like to contact you directly?
Yes, so please feel free to, you can go to my website and you can get a free template for a resume if you don't already have your resume. And if you're interested in working with me, I'm happy to give a free 15-minute consult. So please feel free to contact me and get on my list, my contact list, because I send out a blog every week that's free to everybody. It's a short blog with information every week. And I also do other webinars in addition to the webinars I do for Savvy Ladies. They're all free for the attendees. So thank you again, and thank you, Savvy Ladies, for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending, and I'll wrap up with answering some of these last couple of questions. They were about recommendations for job searching, and I can tell you just from my own experience and others, is offer your services pro bono. And working with nonprofits is a great way where you can deliver on your passion and also help an organization you really love. And that really helps with networking and getting you out there to share and grow your network, and also possibly, you know, make the job connection you need. So I would say that is a great recommendation. And I can probably give one or two references with people on my team who've come through from pro bono to being hired and networked by actually members of the Savvy Ladies organization. I think that is wonderful. This webinar will be available to everyone. It'll be on the Savvy Ladies website. We also post it to YouTube, and Savvy Ladies helpline is always available for any financial questions you might have as you're changing jobs, looking to figure out your 401, what that might mean, preparing for, you know, getting back into the workforce, what that means to your finances as well. So feel free to reach out and contact us, and we look forward to the next webinar here. So Amy, again, thank you very much. And thank you to all those who joined us today.